I spent 10 years trapped in a place where the world never changed. 10 years breathing through fear, living behind masks and gloves, watching life happen from behind glass walls. Most people measure their childhood in memories. Mine was measured in medical charts and percentages that predicted whether I would live long enough to see another year. I wasn't supposed to survive. I wasn't supposed to grow up. But somehow, against every statistic, I did. And now, at 21, I am learning how to live a life I was never promised. One step, one breath, one terrifying moment of freedom at a time. This isn't a story about illness. It's a story about rebirth. I always believed that the human body learns to survive long before the mind understands what survival truly means. My story began not with strength, but with the slow, choking fragility of a body that refused to behave like everyone else's. At 21, I stand on the edge of my second life, but for more than 10 years, I lived inside a world that never changed: white walls, measured footsteps, and the quiet hum of machines that replaced the sound of laughter. Cystic fibrosis was not a word to me at first, it was a cage. A set of restrictions that dictated how far I could walk, how deeply I could breathe, and how much hope I was allowed to feel. It consumed my days, reshaped my nights, and slowly rewrote my understanding of what it meant to be alive. For years, the hospital wasn't a place I visited. It was my entire world. I learned to sleep at any moment, anywhere. Sometimes my body simply shut down, eyes open, consciousness drifting, as if sleep pulled me into itself without warning. Nurses told me that it was normal. I never believed them. Nothing about my life felt normal. I lived in isolation, not because I wanted to, but because the disease demanded it. 1.5 meters, an invisible wall between me and the only people who could truly understand what I was going through, others with the same diagnosis. It wasn't fear. It was survival. Any stray infection, any unfamiliar bacteria, could take away what little strength remained. So the rules became absolute. Masks. Latex gloves. Limited contact. Clean surfaces. Long hours of quiet. Outside the hospital, people lived. Inside, people waited. We waited for test results, for new treatment protocols, for our lungs to cooperate for at least one morning. We waited for news, for hope, for someone to tell us that the next year wouldn't be our last. We waited for our bodies to give us one more chance. Most of all, we waited for time that none of us were guaranteed. And yet, even within that suffocating stillness, life continued. It moved in small, fragile ways. Books passed from hand to hand. Letters from the outside world. Messages from people who loved us but could not be near us. I learned how to be alone, not because I wanted solitude, but because solitude was the only companion I had left. Doctors rarely spoke about the future. When they did, it wasn't a promise, it was a percentage. 5%. 30. 90. A number that represented how likely I was to keep breathing for another decade. But even the best numbers carried the same inevitable ending. They taught us that death for people like me came quietly, like exhaustion after a long day. A sudden, overwhelming desire to sleep. And then nothing. I used to think about that a lot. Not with fear, but with a strange, soft acceptance. It was almost peaceful. Almost comforting. But then something changed. I began to feel the faintest shift in the way my body responded to treatment. A new medication. A new protocol. A new chance. The recovery wasn't sudden. It wasn't cinematic. It was slow, painfully slow, like learning to breathe all over again. 10 years after I entered that hospital, I finally left it as someone almost unrecognizable. The world outside was too bright, too loud, too alive. I kept reaching for a mask that wasn't there. My hands twitched, searching for gloves that I no longer needed. I stepped into the hallway of my own home expecting to be stopped by warnings, rules, alarms. Nothing happened. For the first time in a decade, the air touched my skin without permission. I didn't know how to live freely. I didn't know how to exist without checking my oxygen, without isolating myself, without scanning the environment for threats. I didn't know how to speak to people without measuring distance. Every simple action felt like breaking a rule I had memorized for survival. But beneath the confusion was something else, something fierce and trembling. Awe. A sense that I had crossed the border between two realities, the life where my body controlled me, and the life where I could finally control it. I stepped outside, and the world felt impossibly large. Streets, voices, sky, movement, all of it collided with me at once. I wanted to cry, but I couldn't. My body was too stunned to react. Freedom is a shocking thing when you haven't felt it for 10 years. And yet, even that wasn't the end of my journey. My illness had shaped me, but it hadn't defined everything. Somewhere in the middle of those silent years, I had met someone who cared for me, someone living 1,000 kilometers away. Someone who couldn't visit often, but whose presence still seeped into my world like warm sunlight through a closed window. Love wasn't a dramatic scene from a movie. It wasn't flowers in a hospital hallway or whispered promises beside a bed. It was rare, fragile, almost impossible, but real. Even intimacy, rare as it was, felt like a victory against the disease that had tried to take everything else from me. Now, standing in the open air, I finally felt the weight of what I had survived. I wasn't fragile anymore. I wasn't isolated. I wasn't a number with a percentage beside it. I was simply alive. And for the first time, that was enough. When I walked out of the hospital for the last time, I expected to feel victorious. I thought the moment would explode inside me like fireworks. Instead, I felt weightless, so light that the world itself seemed to tilt under my feet. The air tasted unfamiliar. The sky looked too open. Even the colors felt unnatural, as if someone had turned the saturation up too high while I wasn't looking. I wasn't stepping back into my old life. I was stepping into a world I had only watched through a window. The first days were overwhelming in ways I couldn't explain. I didn't know how to move through a space that wasn't controlled by rules. For 10 years, every action came with a checklist: mask, gloves, distance, caution. My body wanted to follow those patterns. I would catch myself reaching for protective gear that wasn't required. My mind kept warning me about invisible dangers that no longer existed. Freedom didn't feel natural. It felt like a skill I had forgotten how to use. Simple things, walking into a store, sitting on a bench, breathing unfiltered air, felt like enormous acts of defiance. I kept expecting someone to stop me, to remind me of the rules, to send me back to the room where I had spent so much of my life. But no one did. The world kept moving, indifferent to the decade I had lost. The first time I stepped into a crowded street, I froze. People walked past me, laughing, carrying groceries, talking into their phones, arguing about nothing, ordinary life. For a moment, I felt like an imposter inside their world. They had routines, schedules, memories of all the years I had missed. I had only sterile rooms, cautious footsteps, and quiet breathing exercises. But the thing about the world is that it refuses to wait. So I learned to follow it. I began rebuilding myself slowly. I took short walks. I tried exercising, even though my lungs protested like rusty gears trying to start after years of inactivity. I discovered how exhausting ordinary life could be, but how beautiful exhaustion felt when it wasn't caused by illness. My body was weak, but it was mine. My life was unfamiliar, but it was mine. For the first time, the future wasn't measured in months or percentages. There was a moment, I remember it vividly, when I realized I wasn't afraid of tomorrow. I had spent so many years preparing for the possibility of a quiet, painless ending that I forgot to imagine a meaningful continuation. But now I woke up each morning with a strange, fragile curiosity. What will I experience today? Sometimes I would watch the sunrise and wonder how long it had been since I'd seen it without a window between us. Other times I would simply sit outside and let the air touch my skin, reminding myself that I didn't need permission to exist in open space. Everything felt new. Everything felt like a gift. Comments from strangers online, messages from people who cared, they became anchors that held me steady as I navigated the chaos of normal life. Their kindness stitched pieces of me together, rebuilding the parts that loneliness had worn thin. I didn't know how much I needed those voices until they appeared. After years of silence, being seen felt revolutionary. And yet, beneath the joy, there was still a shadow, a quiet echo of the life I had lived. I carried memories of long nights listening to machines, of sterile air that smelled faintly of antiseptic, of people I had known only for a moment before they vanished from the hallway forever. Healing wasn't an escape from the past. It was learning to walk alongside it without being swallowed by it. I kept reminding myself. I survived. Not by accident, by endurance, by stubbornness, by hope that refused to die even when my body almost did. And somewhere within all of this, a different kind of life was waiting for me, a life that existed before the illness took everything. A life with someone who had stayed, even at a distance of 1,000 kilometers. Someone who never stopped believing that I would walk out of that hospital alive. The story of love in my life wasn't dramatic or cinematic. It was quiet, persistent, patient, a steady heartbeat in the background of a decade filled with uncertainty. Even intimacy, rare and delicate, felt like a rebellion against the world that tried to shrink my existence into a hospital room. Now, with every step I took outside, I felt the shadow of that past self walking behind me, not haunting, but witnessing. She had endured what I no longer had to. She had carried the pain that now belonged to memory rather than reality. And as I continued learning how to live again, I realized something profound. I wasn't starting over. I was starting finally. For a long time, I believed that survival was the peak of my story, that leaving the hospital was the final chapter. I never imagined that the hardest part would come afterward, when the world expected me to simply continue as if nothing had happened. Healing wasn't a single moment. It was 1,000 quiet confrontations with myself. I had to rebuild not only my strength, but my identity. The illness had shaped everything, how I moved, how I thought, how I loved. Living without it felt strange, like stepping into a body I didn't fully recognize. There were days when I woke up afraid, not of dying, but of living incorrectly. I didn't know how to exist without constant caution. I didn't know how to relax without feeling guilty. Even happiness felt unfamiliar, like wearing clothes that didn't fit my skin yet. But the world didn't slow down for me, so I learned to adjust. Piece by piece, I grew into the person I was always meant to become. I began exploring things I had only dreamed about during those hospital years, long walks at night, spontaneous trips outside, moments of silence that weren't filled with machines. I learned how good it felt to breathe deeply without fear. I learned how strong my legs were when they weren't carrying the weight of survival. I learned that my body wasn't fragile anymore. It was resilient. And then there was love, quiet, steady, patient love. People assume love is easy, but in my life, it was a complicated miracle. For years, distance and illness controlled everything. I had someone who cared for me deeply, someone who lived 1,000 kilometers away, someone who couldn't be there every day but whose presence filled the silence in ways medicine never could. Our connection wasn't built on grand gestures. It was built on endurance. He stayed through the uncertainty, through the isolation, through the reality that intimacy was rare and limited. When we did have moments together, rare, fragile, but real, they felt like defying gravity. Every touch mattered. Every second mattered. It wasn't about frequency. It was about survival through love. And eventually, impossibly, that quiet devotion grew into something stronger than illness. Into a marriage. Into a future I never believed I could have. Even now, I sometimes look at my life and feel a strange mixture of disbelief and gratitude. I used to be surrounded by white walls, the rhythmic hiss of machines, and the knowledge that every breath was borrowed. Now I live in a world where I can hold someone's hand, laugh in public, walk without fear, and rest without medical supervision. I never expected to reach this version of myself. A person who can plan. A person who can hope. A person who can imagine a life beyond percentages and expiration dates. But something inside me shifted the moment I understood the truth. Survival isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning. I carry my past with me, not as a wound, but as a foundation. Every long night. Every moment of isolation. Every quiet victory. Every rare breath of peace. They built the version of me who stands here now, stronger, softer, more aware of life's fragile beauty. When I walk into sunlight, it feels like a continuation of the moment I left the hospital. The same shock. The same awe. But now, the fear is gone. What remains is the simple, overwhelming truth. I am alive. I am loved. And for the first time, the future is mine to create. The girl who survived is still inside me, watching, proud, finally at rest. But the woman I have become, she is only beginning. In the end, I realized something no doctor ever told me. Survival isn't a return to the life you once had. It's the creation of a life you never thought you'd reach. I am no longer the girl who counted days through hospital windows. I am no longer the patient who lived her life in percentages. I am no longer the body defined by its limits. I am the woman who walked out of the dark and chose to keep walking. Every breath I take now feels like a promise. A promise to the version of me who endured the years I cannot forget. A promise to the people who stayed even when they couldn't be near. And a promise to the future that finally belongs to me. My story didn't end in a hospital bed. It began the moment I stepped into the world again. Free, frightened, fragile, and unmistakably alive. And now, for the first time, my life is not something I'm trying to save. It's something I'm learning to live.